as well as some other places. And today I want to talk to you about music videos in VR. It's a topic I think is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. When I'm talking today, I'm going to probably sound a bit critical about what people are doing in terms of VR music videos. And that criticism is going to come from a place of love, like I'm very excited about this. But as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of errors, there's a lot of inappropriate design choices being made, and we're going to talk about a few today. So first off the bat, there's a disclaimer that VR music videos are almost never VR. And we're going to talk about why they don't really classify as VR. But that's the first case. So when I say VR music videos, and a lot of the examples I'm going to show you, I'm using VR in a very casual way, very common terminology. It's not technically accurate. So that may be a point of confusion later, but I hope it's clear. So as I said, VR experiences, not just for music videos, but in general, VR experiences tend to make a lot of bad design choices. And these design choices come from the experimental phase that we're all in with VR. VR has been around for a long, long time, decades. But VR, as the way that we're going to talk about it and the way you have experienced it, if you've experienced VR, is very new. Consumer VR is maybe 3-4 years, effectively. So everything that we're doing now, people more advanced than myself and people like myself, we're kind of sometimes just throwing ideas at a wall and seeing, does this make me ill? If it does, maybe I shouldn't do it next time. But then some people say, well, it makes you ill, but being ill in VR, that's normal, so that's not a problem. But it is a problem, and we're going to see some examples. This is an example of something produced by Horizons. Horizons is a studio that makes interactive musical experiences. They worked with a number of artists. This is actually for a song called Outlier by Bonobo. And you'll notice very much that this is a transportive experience. You're flying, and you're using this pointer. This is for Google Daydream specifically, which is a mobile VR device we'll look at. And you kind of guide yourself around. And you can tell you're moving because you have these lines, and they help to give you a sense of motion. And that is one of the first fundamental errors of VR. You're not supposed to have your guy flying around really quick because they're not grounded, and their body tells them that that's not right. So this is an example of something that's very cool. You can do it for a couple minutes, but you're going to feel a bit ill. For most people will feel a bit ill. And if you assume that that's how VR is, that's one of the reasons why people don't like to spend a lot of time in VR. It's because of experiences like this. So let's first talk about what does VR bring, and what does it take away? Because it's this great, amazing, immersive medium, but it doesn't do everything that you can do in other places, in other mediums. The first thing it does is that it immerses you. The viewer is in a place. They're no longer where they were, they're in some place new. Viewers now have agency, which means that they have a sense of control of their action. And this depends, the degree to the agency depends on what platform they're using. But even the simplest platform, something like Google Cardboard, which I hate talking about, but even in that, you have a sense of agency as to where you're looking. And that's fundamentally different than any other creative medium, be a visual medium like a film or TV, where you tell them where they're looking. But in this case, the viewer always has at least the control over where they're looking. And so that agency helps to lead to a sense of engagement. They're more focused on what they're doing because they have a role in this experience. What it takes away is control. Once you give some sense of agency to the viewer, to the player, to the user, that's control that's coming away from you, the creator, the artist who's constructing this experience. And so you have to be comfortable creating, knowing that this wonderful experience, this linear sequence of events that you've said, this is the perfect way to experience it, I don't know if they're going to experience it that way or in that order. So you're losing a sense of linearity. And to some extent, you're losing the focus on music. But that's, I think, a fundamental issue with music videos in general. Are you focusing on the video as opposed to the music? And VR music videos just take that same issue and enhance it a bit. So let's very fundamentally talk about the platforms that we have available to us as consumers. because these come with certain benefits and certain limitations, and these, if you're an artist and you want to reach an audience, you have to make a very strong decision as to which one you're going to use. So we have tethered and mobile VR devices. Tethered ones are far more powerful, far more immersive. Mobile are much cheaper, and they work with mobile devices. So you just slot your phone right inside of it. It's probably the one most of you have worked with, or mobile device ones. Upstairs, we have a couple Vives, we have a couple Rifts. Those are probably the two best ones on the market. But of course, we also have some Gears up there. We might have a couple Google Daydreams. I'm not sure exactly what's up there. And then Cardboard, which is maybe the most famous one. So when I say that music videos in VR are usually not actually VR, the reason I'm saying that is there's a couple dimensions that they're lacking. We have these 6 degrees of freedom, 6 degrees of freedom of motion. There's 3 degrees in which you can simply translate yourself. You are simply moving. And these are things that mobile VR does not have, but a tethered VR has. When you have a mobile VR, you have those 3 dimensions, and you can rotate along those 3 dimensions. So you can turn it knows when you're turning your head. So mobile VR can do that, which is why I put these 3 here. So you can do that. It knows when you've moved your head, it knows where you're looking, it knows your eye's orientation. But tethered VR experiences put those 6 together, and that gives a legitimate sense of real VR. You can now move around in a space. And that's a fundamental thing that's lacking in most music videos that are made for VR, because at the end of the day, when you make a music video for VR, it's coming from this motivation to give it to the widest possible audience. And the widest possible audience is mobile VR. Something on the order of 80% of all VR devices are for mobile devices. And so if you want to reach the widest audience, you say, well, I have to give the most limited experience possible that I can still say is immersive. So that's why you see most music videos are not actually VR, they're just 360 videos, which is something on the spectrum lower than that. So why does VR make us ill? Whether it's not just VR, why do immersive experiences make us ill? They make us ill because they're giving our brain input that is not consistent with other input that our brain is currently processing. So that's why when we come back to this idea, that first example of horizon, that motion is going to make you ill. The motion will make you ill because your eyes are telling you you're moving, the rest of your body is telling you you're not. Now, there are ways to design around that, but when you only have rotational input, you don't have anything else really to give the brain to say, it's all right. What you're seeing it's all right. Don't worry about it. You're fine. So in that situation, your body just feels like, well, I must be poisoned. I must be dying. Let me start vomiting because I must have eaten something, and that's making me feel this way. So something that you can do, which you should do, if you want to make an immersive experience in which there's a lot of motion, you need to ground the user in the scene. Something needs to stay with them the whole time. Everything else is moving. There's something that needs to stay with them that's not moving. And a good example of that is for PlayStation VR. It's called Eagle Flight. This is not a music video. This is a proper game. But the whole function of the game is you're an eagle and you're flying around. It's very, very challenging to do. It was a big technical challenge to make this not kill people, basically. And one of the ways they did it, they had a couple tricks that they used, but one of them was they put the beak of the eagle always in the bottom of the scene. No matter what you're doing, that stays with you and that grounds you. There's a music video that we're going to review in a minute that attempts to do the same thing. It's motion. It's moving you through this techno, electro-inspired futuristic scene, and you're on a platform. If you can see the platform, and the platform staying with you that whole time, for most people, that reduces the sense of nausea. You're like, okay, I'm moving, but I'm not actually moving. Relatively, I'm not moving. So this is a way to counteract that. So when we talk about 360 video, which is the most common type of music video, immersive music video, even in this regard, there are choices you have to make about how immersive you're going to put the person. The simplest one is monoscopic, which is the most common. And this allows you higher resolution, but when you see it, it's just like the inside of a globe. It's just everything is flat. You are immersed. There is stuff going on around you. You can turn your head, And oftentimes it looks really crisp. It has the highest possible resolution. You can have these really great camera rigs that do this for you. But there's no depth perception. You really do know that effectively nothing's going to happen. I'm not really in the scene. And because the perspective of the camera's not moving when they filmed it, no matter what you do with your head, you're not actually changing the perspective. That last point is true when you do stereoscopic, but the way you do stereoscopic, you have two cameras that are slightly offset, and one camera is for each eye. And because they're slightly offset, you do get this legitimate sense of depth perception. So stereoscopic is the far superior 360 video method, but it's far more complicated. It's really, really difficult because when you do 360 videos, you have all these cameras taking in different directions, and then you have to merge those. You have to stitch them together so that I have 6 different video inputs, but it's all one consistent scene around me, and I can't see the lines. I can't see where this was one camera and that was one camera. That's already relatively difficult with the monoscopic approach. But when you do telescopic, you're doubling the number of cameras. You actually are still trying to synchronize 2 cameras together, and then those 2 cameras together with other sets of 2 cameras together. And because they're seeing each object at a slightly different angle, stitching an object in space becomes really difficult. And any error, you now start seeing objects occluding into other objects. It becomes really, really difficult. Any error is enhanced in its perceptibility. So you don't see so many of these, except like with the gorillas video, when it's animated, because when it's animated, you really have less detail in the scene. You have better control over the lighting, because lighting is really, really difficult to balance, because as you're shooting over the course of a day, lighting's changing. And as you're shooting from different perspectives, the lighting has a slightly different, perception to you is different. So when you're doing an animated music video, this you directly control. You determine the consistency of the lighting, and it's a lot easier to do. So you see more stereoscopic presentations when you're mixing non-real video input with either exclusively non-real, or you're mixing it with real video. So some of the characteristics of this, as I was just saying, is that you get this surrealist imagery. You get a lot of animation, a lot of CGI. It's not real-time CGI. It's just now it is still CGI, but in a pre-rendered form, in a video form. And that's because it's much easier to present with depth. You should have a stationary perspective to your videos. That's also a key important design aesthetic for 360 videos. You don't see it all the time, but you should see it all the time, because when you don't have it, illness is it should be expected. And another important point, and this is more from a videography standpoint, 360 videos are not like any other type of video, because you can't jump cut. You can't snap to different perspectives. This is a first-person experience. You're there. So you have to have these long shots, these long takes. If you're going to try to cut and change things around that scene, you have to use these tricks like in Red Foo's video. Everything around you is white, is whited out. And the only reason he did that is so that when he decided to change the actors, change the scene, you're not really perceiving that there's a change. They just kind of fade in and they fade out, because everything is whited out. So it's kind of like an animated approach to a real location shooting. So an alternative to 360 video is using real-time CGI. This is more properly like actual VR, because you normally need a computer to run this. It's all real-time. So when you do real-time, you have to optimize. It's not easy to do that, because normally if you're going to be showing, depending on the platform that you're using, the frame rate has to be really high in VR, much higher than in a non-VR sense. Usually on the order of like 90 to 100 frames per second is the minimum. So whatever you're rendering, if it's a video, normally you control that very easily. It's just a video. You play it at that rate. But if it's something that's being done in real time, it has to be 2-3 times faster than a television frame rate or something. So that's all computationally expensive. So you tend to see these things which are very cartoonish again, because with cartoons you can control the degree of detail that you have to manage. When you have real-time experiences, you have, for the first time that we're talking about, interactivity. And aside from 6 degrees of freedom, interactivity is what would make something truly VR. Can I interact? Can I change? Now, it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's interactable or not interactable. There are degrees of interaction that you have. So in, for example, Old Friend, this is a silly kind of psychedelic music video. You can dance around, you have arms and legs, you're in the scene, you can actually touch other objects, but you're not moving them. So your interactivity is very, very superficial. But you have this sense that I'm in the scene and I can kind of walk around a little bit. And all this stuff is going on around me. With Bjork's video that came out, and there's another one that we'll look at later, just the same thing, you are, again, not really changing what is scripted in that sense. There are these figures, and they're being animated. But what you're able to control to some extent are particle effects around. You can control certain aesthetic design choices. So this is, again, it's somewhere on this spectrum of interactivity. And so when you're designing for these things, you, as a creator, are choosing how much I want the user, the viewer, to be involved with what I'm presenting. Because if it's just passive, if I just give it to them, it's not very much engaging as much as possible, as much as VR is capable of. But if I give them too much, then what I'm actually giving them is music visualization. I'm giving them creative power, and I don't know what they're going to create. It may be nothing at all like what I want them to create. So on this passive interactive spectrum, here's a few examples. And the point I make is that most VR music videos are down here at the bottom, where you really struggle to even call them VR. They're immersive, but they're not virtual reality. At the top, you'll notice that the way VR is up here. This was something that Lance is very fond of, and I am as well. This is really something very interesting. And the reason why it's high on the interactive spectrum is not so much that you are changing the visual experience, but you're actually interacting with other people, so that are communally sharing it. So this is kind of a halfway point. You're not really involved in the creation of the visual experience, but you have a high degree of agency and control over your personal experience there, because you can choose how you interact with other people and affect their experience as well. So looking at a few examples over the last several years, this is one of the first ones. So these are all things you can find in different places. Again, because the VR is so broken up and segmented as a marketplace, sometimes it can be challenging to find one that fits your platform. But Surge is one of the earliest ones. It's a passive experience. It's a real-time CGI, but done very much like it's a cinematic experience. You don't really control it, but it's all being done around you, and it's really quite effective. And I would recommend anyone who wanted to see what is possible. This is usually still held up as one of these great examples of what really can be possible visually in this medium. A more recent one is Young, Dumb and Broke, which was premiered as a VR experience at South by Southwest. It's a rubbish experience. It's nothing. And I put it up here just because it's very recent and it got a lot of press, but it's nothing. Nothing that we haven't seen before. But what they're telling us is really amazing is this sense of projection mapping, which is where you paint with lasers on a building, on the surface of a building. So this is the first video that allows you to do that in VR. And I don't know what that means, and I work in VR. So this is why I bring this up. That even an amazing, groundbreaking technology like this doesn't really change the experience of what this is as a user, as a viewer. Fantasynth is another one that I mentioned before, where you're on a platform and it's moving. So what's interesting about this, and the reason I really want to draw attention to this, again, even though I mentioned it before, it's very difficult. Music videos and all type of videos are very linear. There's a story that's going on. In VR, it's very hard to tell stories because you can't control where they're looking, and you can't jump cut. And how do you move someone through? I mean, very few stories happen in a single location where you don't have to interact. You don't have to change your perspective. So in this one, there's not a story per se, but there's still, again, this sense of, well, it's boring if the person just sits there and stands there. They've got to move. They've got to see changing landscapes. So how can I do that in VR? Their way was to put you on a platform and slowly, just very passively, just move you through this landscape. And that's a weird design choice. It's a very intuitive design choice, but the experience is not ideal. It's a bit ill-inducing. But this highlights this challenge of, do I make an experience where the person is not moving, or do I make an experience where I move the person? Because if I expect them to move, that's not something that's really that available in VR. This is another experience where you're controlling particle effects, so you're kind of drawing the scene around you with the music. It is highly interactive in terms of music videos, but you still had to predetermine the colors and the shapes, and it only fits certain types of music. Again, it tends to be quite surrealist music that is appropriate for these type of experiences. Anything that's about people and in stories, where there's a clear narrative, VR is a tough medium to translate that. Except in the case of Elton John's recent one, where he announced his upcoming retirement. So here is a great example where VR allowed you to create an artist that is either dead or is much older than he appears, and you have this potential now to take with a body actor, a body double, to digitally de-age, and now have live music experiences that are not possible anymore because the person's not live. So I think this is something that we'll really see a lot more, because I personally would love to see Woodstock, and I can't go back and see that. But in a virtual sense, I very much could. And so I think this will actually be inspiring a lot of new projects. Though again, whether you could call this a music video or a virtual concert is a good question. I would say it's a concert rather than a video. And then the way VR, again, this sense that you as the DJ can go into this space and build this entire experience that people can come and visit. And again, is it a concert or is it a video? And in VR, does that really matter? If you don't want to tell a story, then effectively it's a concert anyway. But if you want to tell a story, again, I think this is a great example that the best current experiences are not telling stories, because VR struggles to do that. So right now, and I hope we have it up there later, I leave with this open question, and I'm open to any questions maybe from the audience. Audio Shield, you play your favorite songs from YouTube, these balls come flying at you, and it's just like a little arcade experience. But it's the best-selling VR game. It happens to be set to music. And is this not the best use of VR and music? I would argue that so far it is, though I think some people might disagree with that. But that's where we are right now in terms of representing music in VR. So any questions, please feel free. If not, I will be with the rest of the guys from the VR First Lab on the lounge, on the Sky Lounge. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you talked a lot about, well, you talked a little about how you can manipulate the visual experience of being in video. Do you see similar examples of people affecting the music itself? Changing.
Well, and that's this is this fundamental question. If once you start to, you give the user interactivity, the user wants more interactivity. This is why I really don't know that VR makes a good medium for this at all. Music videos are a 2D screen concept. VR is going to ask us for something very much different. And so the artist might actually be, the job of the artist in VR might be to engage you and guide you through an experience that you create. So instead of it being just I make something and you consume it, as much as I teach you to do something and you do it and you appreciate that I taught you how to do this or that I guided you through this process. So the role of the artist, whether it's musical or visual, I think in VR will be fundamentally different than it is currently. Yeah. Thank you very much.